Hello Year 8 and welcome to a recap of all the grammar that you should know by now. I'm going to whiz through nouns and then there will be another video on verbs as well. So let's start with the basics on nouns. We know three cases. We know the nominative, which is the doer of an action. We know the accusative, which is the receiver of the action. And we also know the dative now, which means to or for that thing or that person. We also know that nouns can be either singular or plural. So whether a noun is nominative, accusative or dative, they can also be one person or more than one person. So for example, you can have a girl hugs a boy, and there you would have a singular nominative and a singular accusative. Or you could have the girls hug the boys, and there both the nominative and the accusative are plural. In English, plurals are easy to spot because they end in S, whereas in Latin they're a little bit more complicated than that. So those are the basics of what each of those cases mean. So now let's look at what they actually look like in Latin. So here we have a table of these endings. If you don't already have this table written into your book in some form, then make sure you write it in now. You should have a table that's completely filled in with all these endings. So it's really important that you do. Now, there are some really simple things going on here, and there are some slightly weirder things going on here. So the nominatives across the top are the doers. So remember, there are three groups of nouns. They're called declensions, but if you prefer to just call them groups of nouns, that's fine. And they have different endings depending on which group they belong to. So we have puella, servus, and mercator. Essentially, the first group, the nominative ends in a. The second group, the nominative ends in us. And the third group, the nominative can end in whatever the heck it wants to. It kind of breaks all the rules, that one. But then when we get to the accusatives, it's really straightforward. Remember that accusative singular, so if you have one person receiving an action, it ends in M. So if you see M on the end of a word, you know it is one person. So in that first example, it's a girl. The second one, servum, is a slave. And the third one, mercatorum, is a merchant. And within a sentence, they will all be receiving the action. They won't be doing the action. So they're the ones that are being hugged, killed, loved, whatever it is. The accusative plural, they all end in S. As, os, and es. So if you see a word that ends in S, then it means that it's more than one thing receiving an action. So puellas, the girls, servos, the slaves, mercatores, the merchants. Notice how mercatores in the nominative looks exactly the same as it does in the accusative, which makes things a little bit more complicated, but usually the nominative will be found at the start of a sentence. So if you have mercatores at the start of a sentence, you know it's the nominative and therefore the doer of the action rather than the accusative. And then the datives get a little bit weird, but you just need to learn these endings off by heart. So to or for a girl would be puellai, to or for a slave is servo, and to or for a merchant is mercatori. Then the plurals, to or for the girls, puellis, to or for the slaves, servis. Note how the first and second declension there are exactly the same, so that's only one ending that you have to learn there. But then the third declension, to or for the merchants, is mercatoribus. Okay, so those are all the endings that you have to learn. What I find is the best way to learn those is to get chanting. So as long as you remember that it goes nominative, accusative, dative, singular, and non-nominative and accusative, dative, plural, you should be spending time either in your head or out loud, even better, chanting puella, puellam, puellai, puellai, puellas, puellis, servus, servum, servo, servi, servo, servis, mercator, mercatorem, mercatori, mercatores, mercatores, mercatoribus. Or if that's too wordy for you, just chant the endings a, am, I, as, is, us, o, eos, is, blank, me, es, ibus. Okay, but you need to know what those endings are and also what they mean. Let's put this into a little bit of practice. So if we look at these sentences below, okay. So I'm going to make a note here of what each case is for each noun. Usually, the nominative will be at the start of the sentence. So let's assume that that is the case for all these sentences. So that makes things really easy. Okay, this isn't always the case, but for these example sentences, it is. And then we can look at the other cases in a bit more detail. So if we have a look at this first sentence, Puelam ends in an M, so that means it's accusative. So that means it's a girl that's receiving that action. Spectat means watches, so this sentence means the thief watches the girl. The thief is the nominative because he's the doer. If we look at the second sentence, this one ends in an M as well, so it must be accusative. So this one means the slaves curse the master. Now look at that ending there, servi. If we scroll back up, servi is not a singular ending. Look at these singular endings here. None of them end in an I. However, it is this one here, and that one's plural. So it can't just be the slave, it must be the slaves, plural. Okay, the third sentence, mercator res, that was a plural ending as well, so we know it's more than one merchant. And amikos is one of those accusative plural endings. So it's not the same word as servos, but it's the same ending, and that's the most important thing at this point. So amikos must be accusative, but it must also be plural. So that means this sentence is translated as the merchants greet the friends. So you've got plural here, plural here. So in English, make sure you include your S. The next sentence, femina is your nominative, canem is your accusative because he ends in M. But amikis, that is a dative ending, and it's not just dative, it's dative plural, because remember the dative plural endings were is and ibos, so we need a 2 or 4 here. So the translation of this sentence is the woman gives the dog to the friends, plural. Okay, the sentence about Caecilius. We've got Caecilius there as our nominative, and then we've got 2 words that end in M. So these must both be accusative. And we are told Caecilius amat, Caecilius loves, Metella, and Quintus. So he's doing the action because he's the nominative, and the other 2 end in M because they are the accusatives. Second to last sentence, puer is our nominative, discum ends in M, so it's our accusative. Mercatori, let's see if we can find that ending I. Now it could be this one here again, servi, but the word is mercator, and mercator belongs to the third group of nouns. Mercatori with an I on the end is here, so he must be dative singular, so he must be 2 or 4. So that means that this one here is your dative. So this sentence translates to the boy ostendit shows, and then your accusative, the discus, and then your dative to the merchant. So you've included that translation of 2 or 4 there. And then the final sentence, your nominative plural, because it ends in es, is phores. Your accusative plural, because it ends in as, is togas. And you've got a dative plural, is. Okay, so this one is translated as the thieves give togas to the slaves. Okay, so that is a quick whiz through all the cases. I will scroll back up so you can have another nice look at this table, and if you need to pause the video, copy this out, maybe try covering it up, try practicing what those endings are, but you need to learn them off by heart, and you don't just need to learn them as random letters in your head, you've got to make sure that you know what they mean. So remember, nominative is the doer, accusative is the receiver, dative we translate as 2 or 4.